When people talk of religion, they tend to speak about beliefs. Now, beliefs are important, but for Jews and Christians, religion is actually rooted in rituals. The things that we do together as an expression of collective memory and shared ideals. Nowhere is this more clearly expressed than in the Jewish experience of Shabbat, where the Passover is remembered ritually at the dinner table week after week for over 3,000 years. And in that meal and in that ritual, the youngest member of the family asks the senior member, "What are you doing? What do you mean by this?" as they gather to eat and to remember. And that youngest child, and then this education permeates the table and the family and the tribe and the nation. They're told, "Remember that you were once slaves in Egypt, and God delivered you and brought you into the promised land. Remember, therefore, who you were, and that will allow you, encourage you, enforce you, and support you in treating other people as you were treated by God." For Christianity, of course, that ritual is at the very heart of the Eucharist. And it is the Eucharist and Easter, Christmas and Easter, that become the backbone of Christianity. And today, the first Sunday of Advent is the first touch, the first look at what Christmas is all about. We remember the events that precede to Christmas night and the birth of Christ. But speaking of ritual in this way, as not just what we believe, we only believe, and we can only believe as a community, if we act ritually as a community. That's why there's no such thing as lone wolf Christians who are Christians. We're spiritual Christians. The very essence of Christianity is that you come here today, week after week, to come together and to reaffirm that ritual and the meaning that is at the heart of that ritual. Ritual is the vehicle that carries our faith and our belief. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks says, "Ritual is the poetry of deed, the choreography of faith." So today, on the first Sunday of Advent, what is our ritual telling us all about? And it's telling us that we should look back and we should look forward. In Advent, our reading today, it's sort of confused, I know. You're reading about the end of times before Christ has even come. But throughout that story that we're going to follow, it's going to be about that, about looking back and looking forward. So looking back, we have to remind ourselves that the birth of Jesus is not something that happened, so to speak, by God dropping into his world out of a clear sky, coming down and taking off his God clothes and hanging them just outside the room of the world and coming in to be one of us. What we're speaking about is that the coming of Christ is not a second thought of God when things didn't seem to be going well, but it is rooted in the doctrine, rooted in the act of creation, where from even before the fall, God himself had created a world, an order, a people with whom he could relate. The fall, yeah, there's been a fall, but remember, the fall is a wobble. It doesn't break everything up. God continues to come. And so that journey to Bethlehem is rooted in the story of creation. God has always been coming, And we remind ourselves about this coming as we read and as we go through the season of Advent. How does this express itself? Well, one of the things that I think most people have some difficulty with is all of these begats. Remember in the book of Matthew? And John begat Mary, and Mary begat, and on and on and on, and then, and so on and so forth, and everybody was beginning. Everybody was begetting. And finally, you come to Mary. But the story that is being told there in the gospel is rooted in the Old Testament scriptures. The story that from the beginning, God has been involved. And that moment, that Christmas, that event of Christ, the human face of God, Christ, the Word of God, breaking into history in human form, that is what all of the past preparation has been about. The first covenant, pointing to the Messiah, the covenant of Christians, pointing to Christ. So when we speak of Advent, we speak of the coming of Christ. It's not a second thought. It's at the very heart of all that we do. And that first thing is that we remember that this is not an accident, but this is something that God has been planning before the foundation of the earth. The coming of the living Word, the Word becoming flesh and dwelling among us. And he just doesn't pop on the scene. It is rooted in everything that Jews and Christians believe. Everything is a movement towards Bethlehem. And everything after that is a movement that looks back on Bethlehem and the centrality of Jesus. Now, that's looking back. So what do we look forward to? We look forward to a world in which Christ has come, where many people still do not recognize him. We look forward to a world where the events of the Ukraine shatter and shake any human heart when you see what is happening, and you ask, well, where is God? How can we face the future? To face the future, you've got a couple of options. You can be an optimist, or you can be a pessimist. But Christians don't believe in optimism, or Jews. We don't believe in optimism or pessimism. We believe in hope. Hope. So what is this hope that I'm talking about, and how does it differ from optimism and pessimism? Optimism and pessimism are not the same thing, Jonathan Sacks says. Optimism is the belief that the world is changing for the better. Hope is the belief that together we can make the world better. Optimism is a passive virtue. Hope is active. It needs no courage to be an optimist, but it takes great courage to have hope. The Bible is not an optimistic book. It is, however, one of the greatest pieces of literature about hope. So as we face back to Christ, we look forward in hope, not naively, not with a jingle bells note, but a hope that's very deeply rooted in all that God has been telling us from the creation of the world. I am with you always, even unto the end. God is with us. We face bleak times, frequently, often, and repetitively. But we face them with that firm belief, reaffirmed in our rituals, in our coming here this morning to break bread and to share it and to remember who we are and what our obligation is to the world around us. The little child asks, what are we doing? I ask today, what are we doing? And we're We're coming here again at the beginning of Advent. We're coming here again to pause and remember intentionally that story, the story of God with us, the hope of glory.